Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. After 15 consecutive years of the world champion driving for only two teams, it's Lando Norris and McLaren's day in Abu Dhabi. A titanic battle this season. Max Verstappen bringing a legendary, historic comeback for the ages that will not be quickly forgotten to make this a serious battle this season. But victory in Abu Dhabi was not enough in the championship standings. Lando wins the title in a race not without its controversy. Key moments with Yuki Tsunoda towards the end of the Grand Prix. Could Red Bull have tried something different? Big drama when it comes to potential penalties that could have been employed, but the scrutineering is done. The result is official. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. What a race today. What a championship we've had. Just wanted to start here because before the Grand Prix, the team McLaren were quite clear on what the team orders were going to be. Oscar Piastri had actually been told overnight and even answered to the media effectively today. He didn't say precisely what he'd been told, but effectively the team were telling Oscar, like, please let's not do anything rash at turn one, which is fair, right? You can say what you want about team orders, but Lando qualified ahead. Piastri was not expected to challenge Lando, certainly not in a way where it risked either of their races. They absolutely didn't want a world where Verstappen won because the McLarens crashed out, as they did, let's say, in the sprint back in Austin. So Oscar was told, look, hold positions at the start. They put him on the hard tyres as well because it gave him a different strategy option to go for, go long, hope for a safety car. That was effectively Piastri's strategy. They called it Plan A during the race, and that was a fair plan. Didn't work out, of course, as we know in the end. There was no Hamilton-Latifi crash that there was some discussion about this weekend, but Lando was on the mediums. Max was obviously in P1, and turn one was relatively clean, as you would have expected, really. Piastri starting on the hards, Lando on the mediums. Max is going to drive off into the sunset, but things changed around because at the end of the first lap, well, this is turn 9, Piastri gets past Lando on the outside. So Piastri had a good run. It looked like he used a bit more deployment than Lando did anyway. Lando didn't seem to be defending especially hard. And I guess for Lando's perspective, look, he knew P3 today, whatever happens, was going to be enough. Oscar knew that he needed to win. And if Oscar's sitting in third, he's not just going to sit there and let it happen, right? So even though Oscar was on the hards, he was always going to be all over Lando's rear mirrors because he had to push really hard, I think, Oscar anyway, to try and make something happen. So I think it was pretty inevitable that Oscar, and also the hard tyre today was absolutely the race tyre, was going to put Lando under some pressure. So I think Lando, seeing Oscar coming around the outside of turn 9, was like, you know what, Oscar, you can have it. If I'm third, it's okay. Especially because George Russell, who was considered to be the main threat, he'd lost a couple of positions. The Mercedes today was actually just woeful in general. And all of a sudden, it was all down to the Ferrari, right? Like, this is what's kind of remarkable, especially because you can see Yuki Tsunoda there in the background having a bit of a battle on turn 1 as well. Max was very reliant today on not his teammate Yuki, who tried, controversially so, but not very successfully. But Max was reliant on the pace of that Ferrari tractor to stop Lando winning the title today, which is not where you'd want to be. You want a more competitive teammate, but also if Max had a more competitive teammate, then, you know, he would score fewer points over a season as Lando and Oscar take points off one another, so maybe he wouldn't have even been in the championship anyway. The point here, and maybe you can't find a teammate that could be competitive with Max regardless, they've been trying that for a few years. So Piastri into second, Yuki was on the hards, so it was like, okay, we see what you're doing here, Red Bull, we see what you're doing. We'll see you in the lap mid-20s, right? And that is, of course, pretty much what happened. So Leclerc was giving it a real go. He almost pulled alongside Lando at a couple of points at turn 9. You know, he could have gone for a crazy dive bomb. He was never quite close enough to make it happen. And Verstappen was pulling away, but not pulling away at a crazy rate of knots. But, of course, Oscar also had to push as hard as he could, really, to try and keep up with Max. Of course, they wanted to save something. Oscar wanted to save something in his tyres for Plan A, which was go long and hope for a safety car. So, you know, it was interesting because I thought Max might play some games today, and he didn't really. I think especially at the end of the race, there was an opportunity for Red Bull and for Max to go a different route and really pull out all of the stops. But it seemed to some degree that Red Bull had kind of accepted it today, which is a little, I don't know, it's interesting. I think they've done a phenomenal job. Max has been unbelievable over these last 10 races to make this competition even a challenge at the top of the grid. But under Christian Horner, like, I don't know, in 2021, when things were really tense between the teams, I feel like they would have tried something else today on strategy rather than just hoping that, Leclerc was going to catch up to Lando or something. We'll discuss that as time goes on, what other options they might have had. So Piastri was then told, all right, like, can you maybe hurry up a little bit? Because you can see how much pressure here Lando is under from Charles Leclerc. And because he's in the dirty area of Oscar, it's obviously not ideal. And Lando was under a lot of pressure from the undercut, right? And that's what was possible. We had a bit of drama here. Norris was told Verstappen's tyres are graining a bit more than yours. So clearly Norris was doing a good bit of management. Leclerc eventually dropped out of the DRS. There was no way that Ferrari was going to stay too close for too long. So, Norris withheld the challenge and then he was in prime position. The problem, of course, with Leclerc being very close, Russell was a further 3 seconds back, is that when Leclerc boxes, you have to protect from the undercut. And that means the guys further down the grid that are going longer, you are going to be stuck in a little bit of traffic. But there was serious degradation today. You see, Russell was the first man in on lap 15. Leclerc was in shortly after that. So a couple of laps later, Norris had to come into the box because otherwise he was at risk of a Charles Leclerc undercut. So this is on lap 17. Norris has now come out in P9. He's well ahead of Charles Leclerc and George Russell at this point, but he is behind quite the train. He's got Liam Lawson. He's got Yuki Tsunoda further up the road. And I think Lando did a brilliant job handling this traffic. But what was very interesting here is, at this point on lap 17, the best Lando can possibly hope for is third, really. Because he's stuck in this traffic, he's going to get held up, he's going to lose a fair bit of race time. Verstappen and Piastri are still out there banging in quality laps. So, the pressure was on, really, for Lando to manage this quite well. It's not like there were too many other drivers who could theoretically beat him. Of course, if there was a safety car, things could potentially change around. But it worked out okay for Lando in the end, and I think some of the moves he pulled off here were very impressive. Down the inside on Antonelli at turn 4. Not a move that I think Antonelli was really expecting. Look, he had fresher rubber, obviously. It was like the 2021 move in a way all over again. Then he got past Carlos Sainz a few corners later. Then he made a double overtake on Lance Stroll and Liam Lawson. I wondered if Lawson was going to do anything crazy here. And then, of course, after making these moves, he came up behind Yuki Tsunoda. And Yuki was told on the radio, all right, it's time, Yuki, like, do what you can to fend off Lando. And of course, he was much quicker at that point, much fresher tyres. But we talked about this the other day because they were always going to do this, Red Bull, leave Tsunoda out long like Perez in 2021. And look, I'm sure that they would have studied what Perez did to hold up Hamilton when Hamilton got past on the first DRS, but then Perez got him back and then was able to hold him up for at least one more lap. Yuki's approach, on the other hand, was rather different because he was weaving all over the place on the straight. He weaved right, he weaved left, he weaved right again, and then when he saw that Lando was cutting to the inside of him, he then went back to the left again. And that move was probably the slam dunk. I mean, really, you're only allowed to make one move, but I think that final jig to the left was the slam dunk in the steward's eyes that this was going to be penalised. Now, what was very interesting here is that Lando goes off the circuit in the process. You can see by this image, it's quite marginal, actually. But it does appear that he has, I mean, I'm not exactly sure where it's measured, if it's measured from the actual rubber in contact with the track or from the outer wall of the tyre. But it did appear that Lando, and I think he did, go off the circuit in completing this move. So, did he leave the track and gain an advantage? Now, this has been a major matter for debate, especially people looking back in, like 2012. I think Vettel got a pretty big penalty for this, where he's also, you can see, over this same white line. Now, the rules over time have changed to a certain degree. Yeah, Vettel was penalised by 5 seconds with this overtake on Grosjean. So, you could argue this was not a legal overtake from Lando Norris. I think, in my opinion, you have to apply a little bit of common sense here. Yuki Tsunoda was weaving all over the shop. He was deemed to be driving dangerously. Look, is there more room for Lando to use? Could he have stayed on the track here? And, in that picture especially, it does look like, yeah, okay, in this picture it does look pretty clear he's fully over the white line. But even if he is, and yeah, there's more room for him to use closer to Yuki, and obviously there's plenty of room on the other side of Yuki, but look, Lando committed to the inside, Yuki defended dangerously in the eyes of the stewards and was penalised as a consequence. So I think, from a common sense perspective, Lando is taking evasive action when overtaking a driver who was penalised for dangerous driving for this exact moment, right? So, look, if Yuki wasn't doing anything untoward, then I think we can talk about it for sure. But as far as I'm concerned, Lando was taking reasonable action, given that Yuki, his driving was effectively forcing Lando off the track. And even if you argue that, well, there was more room to stay on the track, Yuki was penalised for this driving. So it feels that, in my opinion, I don't think Lando did anything wrong. And even if there was a penalty, I don't think it would massively matter. However, we do have to discuss, to an extent, the inconsistency of the stewards. You may remember last year in the US Grand Prix in Austin, where Lando was given a 5-second penalty for overtaking Max Verstappen off the track. Now, of course, Max also went off the track at that moment and was deemed to have forced Lando Norris off, because obviously he did. As a result of that, they would normally have given a 10-second penalty for Lando overtaking Max off the track, but because he was forced off, they only gave him 5. Now, this time, today, this is today's document, where they say no further action because this occurred because the driver of car 22 made multiple moves. Car 22 not made these moves, car 4 would have overtaken it without going off track, but moved off track to avoid contact, and effectively he was forced off. It's not considered that he exceeded track limits. So again, there's some controversy here, because you could argue that it should have been a 5-second in line with what happened in Austin last time, but also this first part that says he wouldn't have been off the track if Yuki wasn't driving dangerously, which they penalised him for. So, look, I think personally this is fine. Red Bull not complaining about this massively. Yuki was, for some reason, surprised that he had got a penalty. He also was holding up Norris a little bit because Leclerc was in the same postcode as Norris at this point in the race. But again, it did become business as usual. Hamilton on the side was actually having a pretty good Grand Prix today. And I just wanted to quickly go through a few radio messages, because this was a whole side story of today. It was Hamilton versus Ricciardo Adami. He was told, pay attention, track limits turn 1, we got the second strike. And Hamilton was like, well, damn, you didn't tell me I got the first one. So I was pushing it. So, okay, it didn't affect things at the end of the day, but still not ideal. We know that the communication between Hamilton and Adami has not been good this season. Again, he's told, you're racing Bortoletto ahead. Hamilton's like, look, stop telling me I'm racing them. I'm racing everyone. Just leave me to it. So I think his frustration was really coming out at the end of the season. Hamilton mentioned, okay, Behrman, he went wide at turn 1, right? Report it to the stewards. Adami says, okay, reporting. And clearly Hamilton, pretty fed up with everything, says, don't need to confirm it, mate. Like, I'm just telling you, you deal with it. Don't keep yapping to me on the radio. Adami then says, understood. And Hamilton's like, stop confirming. You can imagine that continuing for a long time. Adami saying, yep, confirm, understood. And then Hamilton's like, look, shut up. I understand that you know what I'm trying to say here. Understood, right? So eventually that ended. And at the end of the Grand Prix, it was P8 in the end for Hamilton. So a good comeback, of course, from where he qualified yesterday. Hamilton says, good season, grateful for all the hard work. We'll fight stronger next season. And Hamilton's like, did you get that one? So that's the one time you don't reply. And Darby's like, yeah, we got it. Sorry we were talking. Thank you very much. It was awesome working with you. Now that's interesting, because that reads a little bit like they might not be working together next season, but that is no doubt a conversation for another day. So lap 41, this was the final round of pit stops. In the end, it did pretty much become a 2-stop strategy. Piastri was still out there praying for a safety car, which never arrived. Norris comes into the pits and the McLaren crew under some pressure, not massive pressure, but of course there's always some level of pressure when you've got to sort of pit stop for what would have been the championship winner at this point in the standings. Piastri was then overtaken by Verstappen. Really nothing he could do at this point in the race. What's interesting about this, as you can see, Verstappen, 28 seconds he had at this point over Lando Norris. And Max had, again, an unbelievable drive. His performances towards the end of the season have been incredible. And this is on lap 53. But actually, before lap 53, Verstappen's gap was actually quite big. When Oscar boxed for the mediums, Verstappen had pretty much a pit stop window over him, right? So there were questions at this point whether Red Bull could have gone for an alternate approach. Because at this point in the race, even a few laps before this, Piastri was trying to chase him down, but it was going to be irrelevant, really. Max and Red Bull could have potentially boxed again with the intention to basically just back up the pack and hope, get Leclerc within Norris's DRS, cause a bit of drama. But instead, they just kind of ran it to the ends and maybe were hopeful that Norris's engine was going to blow up or something, which of course never happened. Also worthy of note, if Norris did get a 5-second penalty for the drama with Tsunoda, then look, he pulled the gap anyway to Leclerc. And even if he was behind Leclerc, Piastri in the final corners would likely have yielded to P4 to give Lando the position. So I'm not sure it would have massively mattered anyway. But lap 54, things were very tense at this point, especially because Norris was catching Piastri actually. And the hard tyre, as I say, was seemingly the tyre to be on. It wasn't like catching him massively, but it was getting a little interesting, and I did wonder whether Norris would try and go for the move or whether anything would happen. But Norris was very sensible. He hung back, and Max Verstappen rounded out what has been a phenomenal season comeback. Kimi Antonelli, the final driver ever to press the DRS button. Lance Stroll with a sensational final lap overtake on Ollie Bearman actually to get P9. He was really happy about it as well. He was the last driver to ever make an overtake with the DRS button. But Lando Norris crosses the line third. All he had to do, and he wins the championship with P3 by just 2 points over Max Verstappen. Russell was way behind. Antonelli had a terrible day, was out of the points. Mercedes just had no pace at all. Both of the Hasses finish in the points, although Stroll did make that overtake happen a few seconds after this screenshot was taken. Hamilton recovers to P8. And after a truly remarkable season, Lando Norris is the world champion. He was leading the championship right at the start of the year. Oscar Piastri took charge for about 15 rounds. Then Oscar fell off a cliff. Lando really hit form around Brazil-Mexico time and held on at the end of the season with all the championship challenges from not just Max Verstappen, but also his own team trying to get the boys disqualified, as we know happens back in Las Vegas. This was Lando after the race as the tears were coming through because, what a moment, right? I mean, you often see this from drivers that they almost don't look excited after they've won because the amount of relief and stress and exhaustion that happens immediately after the championship is secured. And of course, at this point, the championship was not yet official, right? In terms of plank wear and scrutineering and some of the other things that I believe is now all confirmed, as we'll discuss here in a second. But Lando hits the donuts. It was cool to see Carlos Sainz as well, old teammates and friends, giving Lando the credit. And I think he's done a great job this season, Lando, right? I said going into this weekend, any of the three drivers would have been deserving of the title. Look, Max, undisputedly, I think, driver of the season with what he pulled off over the last few rounds. But it takes a team to win a championship. McLaren have put together the best car this year. They didn't bring as many upgrades as Red Bull did from the middle of the season onwards to try and give Max a chance. Their drivers have been out at hammer and tongs as well. And I think Lando's toughened up, right? As the season has gone on, his ruthlessness on certain weekends, his mentality, I think has been stronger than it was earlier in the season. Even his father said a bit about he had to really kind of find his footing and find his way and mentally cope with what he was finding very challenging, certainly in the period where Piastri was starting to take over the championship. Bouncing back from Zandvoort as well was a big challenge. He was very much the key title outsider at that moment, but Lando brought it back to become heavy favourite before, McLaren had their thoughts on the matter in Vegas. The championship would have been wrapped up in Qatar if not for that disqualification. Thought this was really nice as well to see Hamilton giving great congratulations to Lando. And you can see how excited, happy Hamilton looks for Lando that he's got this over the line. What a comeback from Max. We've got to say a few words on Max Verstappen and what he pulled off this season. Look, Red Bull deserve their credit too because they found something with the car. They brought some upgrades to the car. But Max's run over these last 10 rounds has been unbelievable. To go from 104 behind down to only 2. Again, Max will probably think when he goes to sleep at night about his absolute head loss in Spain, which cost him a bunch of points. He also got taken out of Austria, no fault of his own. So a couple of moments there that he'll look back on. But I think what happened in Spain, it's all part of the package, right? It's Max Verstappen. He is unbelievably brilliant, and you will get moments because of the type of competitor that he is when he just loses his head. He didn't do that over the last 10 rounds. He was an incredibly composed professional over these last few Grand Prix, and he set his sights on the world title, and he gave it a damn good go. So a season for the ages, absolutely, and arguably they shouldn't have even been in this position if it wasn't for some of the F-ups, to put it that way, that McLaren have pulled off. This, by the way, was GP after the race, like head in his hands in tears. And it's very interesting because GP's clearly been through a lot. I know that Max Verstappen did comment on it afterwards and pretty much said, look, he's not his place to say on what GP's maybe been going through off the track. And of course, their relationship is so long and tenured and impressive as well. And look, what a season, an emotional roller coaster for all of those guys. I'm not surprised that there were some tears at the end of the Grand Prix. As Verstappen says, don't be disappointed. We can be proud of the comeback. We ended it in style with Honda as well, of course. Next year, it's Red Bull powertrains officially. Max says he's satisfied. We tried what we could. Of course, it was about McLaren's mistakes, the crash in Austin, the disqualification, the engine failure for Lando, as we know, back in Zandvoort. Doesn't matter whether it's 1 point, 2 points, or 50. So, look, maybe Max won't go to sleep tonight thinking about Spain, but I don't know, he might. Max would have been a deserving champion. He finishes the year with the most wins, the most poles, the most laps led, but not the title. But for those that say that Lando is not a deserving champion, I think it's worth looking at the way that the season has played out. I think Oscar would have been deserving as well because he was sensational for the first half of the year, but that period from Azerbaijan through to even Las Vegas, his pace wasn't great. That derailed his championship challenge. But for Lando, right, if you look through Lando's results this season, first, second, third, fourth, second, first, second. That was his opening run of the season. Then Canada, I think, would have been fifth before he crashed into the back of his teammate. Like, that was the only really bad performance that Lando had this season. Then one in Austria, one in Britain, second in Belgium, one in Hungary. Then the Netherlands, he would have been second there. Lost 18 points due to the engine failure. Second in Monza. Of course, the Monza discussion is still relevant because if, well, Piastri hadn't conceded the place in Monza, those 3 points that Lando had wouldn't have been there. So people are saying that, oh, it's all down to Monza and all this. And yeah, to some degree, sure. But equally, if it was necessary for the title today, Piastri would have yielded again. So it's like, if Oscar didn't yield then in Monza, he would have yielded today for Lando to take the title. So it probably wouldn't have really mattered. Seventh in Azerbaijan was probably Lando's low point, really, but it was still better than Oscar that weekend. Then third, second, first would have been seconds in Vegas if not for the DSQ, fourth and third. So look, in terms of most podiums, yeah, Max had most wins, most poles, whatever. But in terms of most podiums, most consistency, frankly, through the season, it was Lando Norris. So, look, I think any of the drivers would have been deserving, but I think absolutely Lando Norris earned this title, right? Like, his, frankly, brilliance across Mexico and Sao Paulo, and then doing what he needed to do at the end of the season, because after Vegas, the pressure was absolutely on. Max was on a tear. I mean, look at Max's last 10 Grand Prix. Second, first, second, first, third, first, right? Like, an unbelievable run from Max. Same story, of course, in the sprint races, pretty much as well, executing every single time. So the pressure was seriously on Lando. It's difficult to hold on when you're getting chased down, but, they got the job done. McLaren's absolute catastrophe in Vegas did not come to bite them in the end. Yeah, these are Max's comments actually on GP on the pit wall at the end of the race. Lando says, I thought of my mother, started crying. I'm happier for my people than for myself, right? So, just a great day for F1. It's fantastic that it wasn't, let's say, compromised by any questionable FIA decision-making. Okay, say what you want about the Norris potential off-the-track penalty, whatever. Like, there was no major drama today. The scrutineering has now been finalised. The cars are legal. No disqualifications for plank wear. There were some questions on whether Max could have done more, right? Like, Oscar even said, at least we don't have to drive those bloody cars again because my back is not happy with me, all the stiff suspension and all that. Oscar says, Max Max, do you not want to back everyone up, right? Like, maybe give the boys a chance. Charles even said the same thing. I was expecting Max to play some games, but that just didn't really happen. Always brilliant to have a Formula 1 season go down to the wire. Lando Norris is the champion for McLaren for the first time, as I say, in 15 years. A driver that wasn't a Mercedes or a Red Bull driver actually won one of these things. And, well, thanks for all the support this season. You guys have been mega. Appreciate everything that you guys have helped grow the channel and support the content and all that this season. And, well, next season, it's going to be different. It's going to be probably very different. The cars are going to be further apart. Who knows who's going to be on top? It's going to be a drastic change in the history of Formula 1. Always great to have a finale going down to the wire, certainly with 3 drivers. But next season, wow, there will be some talking points as well. And we're certainly not done talking about Formula 1, because I'm sure over the coming days, there will be a lot to discuss. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.